dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and is merciful.
The endurance of Job. The book of Job is a profound book. It is 42 chapters long, yet the book itself takes place within a relatively short time frame. It does not span years or decades, multiple people, family units, etc., etc. It happens within a relatively short time frame. To remain steadfast as James would tell us in chapter 5. The book is a specific examination not of suffering, but rather of patience and endurance. Job is often a misunderstood book. It's often misunderstood by us. It is a confusing book that can sometimes leave us scratching our heads. I think a primary reason for that is the overall question that you think is going to be asked during the entire book never gets answered. The main question that we all ask during that book, or as we ask ourselves, is never actually answered straightforward. It's just not. Job will ask, why am I suffering? Why do good people suffer? How does God run the world? His friends would provide a various amount of answers, and well, they were not really helpful at all. And that's really just to say the least by that. Job never really gets an answer to that question. He knows no more about why he is suffering from chapter 1, verse 1, to chapter 42 and verse 17. Job never learns why he is suffering. The lesson we thought we might get answered within this book about suffering and how the world goes around is never seen, because the book is primarily teaching us not about suffering. Many people can miss that, and we can miss that, I can miss that, but the book is about how, not the book, it's about how God runs the world. Instead, the lessons of the book, as James would use as an example for us, is about patience. It's about trust. It's about endurance. Trust can be the overall theme of the book of Job. The lessons of Job that we try to examine, that we look for, because obviously the questions are not directly answered to us, are kind of hard. They're not on the surface of the book. Instead, we have to dig deep to see what the point of Job is. Because certainly the book does show us lessons of suffering and the curiosity that comes with that big why question. But again, the book teaches patience and trust. There are many lessons within this book beyond, along those lines of suffering, and ultimately the unanswered question that we will look at later. For tonight, I kind of just wanted to look at some different lessons that we can learn from the book of Job. The first lesson that we can learn is that the book is applicable to everyone. Everyone can learn from Job. There are few books within the Bible where the author and the date of the book is unknown. For example, we do not know for sure who the writer of Hebrews is. We have our guesses. Sometimes we just say the Hebrew writer, but we're not sure. Obadiah's date is uncertain. People put it in groups because we're unsure as well. Even the book of Ecclesiastes has its questions as well. And Job is right there with them. However, Job is right there with them for not the same reason whatsoever. Job, as I see it, is explicitly designed as such. We do not know who wrote this book, nor do we know when this book was written or when these events actually take place. The book is very vague about its setting and details. What we do see from the book and what we do see from the settings is within the first 5 verses of chapter 1. Job was a blameless man from the land of Uz, and God would say just as much of that within the next few verses. We also know that Job knows Yahweh, as we see in chapter 2, verses 20 and 22. That's about it. We do not know much else about Job or about the people. Some scholars will say that they think this book took place during the days of the patriarchs and before Moses, which is a fair estimation, but again, we don't know. Could it be before that? Could it be long after that? Who knows? And that is what I would say is exactly the point. This could be the oldest book within the Bible, but at the end of the day, the lack of these details is what the point of the book is as I observe it. The book is not confined to certain Israelite sacrifices or dealing with unclean animals or dealing with rebellious people. The point that I want to emphasize, the point that I want everyone to be aware of, is that anyone could be Job. It is a broad look. It is not a specific examination. Job is a faithful man who is suffering. Take out the name Job, insert someone else's name, and the parameters can pretty much still be the same. The lessons of Job apply exactly to you and to my life, and that is amazing. This could be the oldest book ever written. It could be the oldest book ever recorded, and yet the lessons are the exact same. They have not changed. We don't even have to change a parameter within the book whatsoever to even think about having it apply to us, because it does right off of it. The book applies to us just as much as it then did in those days, as much did when James would use it as an example. We do not need to dismiss Job as not applying to us anymore, if you will. As we read Job, we should examine it with those eyes. Just put your name in Job, or put someone else's name in Job, and it fits the exact same. We should read it, really, we should read the whole Old Testament as so much, but that's a whole other topic for a different day. But for now, we're just going to focus on Job for that. Not just to dismiss it as an old story, but an event that holds crucial truth for us to examine today. The second lesson that I'd like to discuss that we learn in Job is that suffering is not always a result of sin. When Satan afflicts Job and Job basically loses everything, he has some friends that has him come to talk with him. One would think, how kind of these friends to come and console Job through these hard times, or at least until you get to about chapter 4, that's what you would presume would happen. Oftentimes in life, we like to think that people get what is coming to them. It's thought that, well, people will get what they put out in life, you know. What fruit you bear is the fruit you get kind of mentality. It's what you thought of, it's what you put in the world, is what you're going to get out. We like to think about karma or someone else deserved that was coming. I even sometimes will joke about that. We all kind of do to a certain extent. And oftentimes, these don't even have to be because of a sinful act per se, but just kind of how the world works in essence. Throughout the world survey, people will think that to a certain place. But here in the book of Job, we have an example of someone who is suffering, who has been stripped of pretty much everything that he has ever loved and known, who lost so much. Was Job sinful? Well, no, we learn that within the first few verses of the book. That question is posed between the friends and Job. That's kind of what they talk about and then eventually argue about for the remainder of their time. We have insight as readers to see the conversations that Job did not get to see. In essence, Job 1 and verse 8, they'll say, "And God said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil.'" So we know why he is suffering. We know as the audience, we know as people who can read this, the parameters behind why all this has happened. But Job never has a clue. Job is never told why he is suffering. He knows nothing more about from when this was told from then going to chapter 42. Job is never made aware of this. He was not given a warning. He was not told anything. As the dialogue with the friends would take place, we see a pattern of kind of where everyone stands to a certain place. In essence, I'm just going to kind of sum up the friends' view in this. There's kind of multiple perceptions that they would take, but The friends would view that Job had committed some horrible sin to bring this upon himself, that God punished him for his behavior that he did. They also perceive that God runs the world on a strict code of justice, that everything runs according to that. There are three, each friend, except for one, gives 3 accounts of speeches by each friend, and Job would then offer a rebuttal for each for the most part. And when you begin in 4, the friends do perceive that Job has sinned. As you begin to read, they're kind of a little bit more easy about it. They're kind of a little bit more nice in the way that they approach certain things. But as you kind of keep reading, they get a little bit more bold in their conversations towards Job. And they would eventually become frustrated, and they would pretty much just accuse Job of his actions. If we're going to turn to chapter 11 and read verses 1 through 6. And it says, Then Zophar the Nathanaelite answered and said, Should a multitude of words go unanswered, and a man full of talk be judged right? Should your babble silence men? And would you mock, shall no one shame you? For you said, My doctrine is pure, and I am clean in God's eyes. But oh, that God would speak, and open his lips to you, so that he would tell you the secrets of wisdom. For he is manifold in understanding. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Right before this, Job has declared a passionate speech about it, and he's making a plea towards God. Job would continue to declare that he is innocent of what his friends have told him of. But his friends are not so sure. They kind of take a different approach to it. And here within these verses is just an example of their boldness, and it would continue to get bolder. And they would believe that Job committed some horrible sin, some horrendous action to bring upon everything that has occurred to him. So much so that this friend even takes it a step further. First, he tells him all that has said, and that really everything up to this point has just been empty words. Everything Job has said has just been babble. Nothing has been true. Nothing. It's just empty words that comes out of his mouth. That his words have made a mockery of what is entirely happening and his friends. That he has been long-winded in all of his words that he has spoken. It's just wasted breath for him. And he perceives them to be nothing more than an excuse and a lie that is far from the truth of what they actually think is true. Essentially, he calls them out, and he tried to silence the good men, which the friend views him and the other friends as the good men, with mere babble, with just mere talk. This friend is attempting to tame a tongue in his mind. He believes Job is out of line and out of place in what he is trying to talk. Little does he know, if we were to go forward in this, that the friends are just attacking Job, and they are a little bit misguided, to say the least. And in verses 4 through 6, he kind of first moves into restating what Job is standing on, and then saying that Job is clean in God's eyes. He will say instead that God needs to speak, which, to be fair, Job would agree with him on that God would need to talk to Job. But he goes even further than that, and in the final part of verse 6, he would say that Job is trying to get off easy, that God is being too easy on Job for his actions. Which I would say, just if you were to keep reading, it's a pretty ironic statement, because he says that God needs to speak, but yet the friend is telling him what God would do instead. I just kind of find that ironic in essence. He would attempt to speak on God's behalf if we would just keep on reading. But these friends, these comforters, as they are supposed to be, are accusing Job that he has done wrong, and that he continues to do wrong by lying about his actions. He continues to sin, according to what his words will say. Job would later go on in chapter 19 to say that these comforters, these are miserable comforters. We now know why Satan left these friends for him. But they are attacking Job this entire time, essentially telling him again and again that he is sinful, that he has done wrong against God, that he is mocking God and deserves more than what has been given upon him already. In fact, Job has been given these horrible friends. So I don't know what else they would want God to do. This entire time, the friends perceive that they are trying to do the best by Job. They believe they are trying to help Job in this essence. And they're really bad attitude, but yes. Even at the end of this attack in chapter 11, the friends will invite Job back into a right relationship with God. We're just going to skip ahead a little bit to verse 13. If you prepare your heart, if you will stretch out your hands towards him, if iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and let not injustice dwell in your tents. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. You will be secure and will not fear, and you will forget your misery, and you will remember it as if waters that have passed away. They want Job to be whole again and in a right relationship with God. Their attempt, while it may be with good intentions in their heart, got thrown way off course and into left field. These friends' stance is that Job has sinned to bring this upon himself. They perceive that God runs the world on a strict code of justice, that Job has done wrong, thus wrong has been done to him, that he is given what he has been brought in. What you sow is what you reap, essentially. Job is also continued in a sinful way, since he will not speak honestly about what he has done. That is where our friends pretty much stay for the entire time. Job, on the other hand, in his rebuttals that he would give and in his own speeches, he utterly rejects this idea that he has sinned. Job goes back and forth between offensive mode and defensive mode between their talks this entire time. Job's headspace is pretty much all over the map. Remember, he is in an emotional state. He has lost everything right out in front of him. His wife wants him to accuse God. His friends are horrible friends, just to be quite honest with you. So he is all over the map with this. And it's hard to kind of find a place within the book of Job that kind of sums up where Job stands. You kind of have to take out parts of different places to see that. But in order to get a full picture, again, you kind of have to scan around. But for tonight, we're going to look in chapter 27, and I think that can provide us a general place of Job's headspace. Well, we're going to read verses 1 of chapter 27. And it says, "And Job again took up his discourse and said, As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days." Job begins this section in verse 2 with what his perception is, that the Lord has done this to him. Job does not understand why he is suffering this entire time. And he affirms his innocence. I have done nothing wrong. I have been right before the Lord. And so he cannot understand why all this is occurring. He perceives it as the Lord who took away his right and to made his soul bitter. But Job would once again affirm that he will not lie. He does not nor will speak falsehood before the Lord. He will keep and maintain his integrity and purity before God. Time and time again, Job will continue to maintain his innocence as the friends continue to attack him over and over again. And if you keep going to verses 5 and 6, and even further than that, Job finds it impossible to perceive that the friends are right in this matter. He is talking to them in verse 5 whenever he says you, that this is directed to their friends. He cannot and will not say that the friends are right. Even until death, Job will maintain his integrity. Which, on just as a side note, the impact that Job displays by proclaiming that he will maintain his rightness is something that we should remember and strive to put in our own lives. Job did not fold at his friends' comments. He stood firm into what he believed, and he stood firm in the face of opposition. He had constant abuse huddled right at him, but he didn't move a dime. He stood his ground, and he stood right before the Lord. He stood strong and firm in his stance. He will proclaim, he will continue to stand by his righteousness. He will not forsake his God. He will be vindicated, as he would continue to say time and time again. His conscience is clear. As he says, his heart does not reproach me for my days. Job has a pure conscience, and it is still focused on what it was when all of this started. That Job is grounded in his faith and his dedication. Another reason why I feel confident in saying all that is that Job remained righteous and staying firm throughout this. It's because this is the similar statement exactly to what God said about Job. We're just going to turn really quickly back to chapter 2. Chapter 2, and begin reading in verse 2. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin, all that a man has he will give for his life." The point that I wanted us to catch, verse 3, he holds fast his integrity. God said that about Job. And guess what? It hasn't changed. God knew who Job was. Job holds fast his integrity. He does not move a muscle, even when the friends are constantly going to attack him. The Lord calls Job an upright and righteous man. God told Satan this about Job even after the first time, and it would remain true throughout Job's entire time. Job remained steadfast because God knows his children. God knows who Job is. Job remained steadfast. Because Satan sought to bring Job down and to turn him against God. But instead, we see that Satan is a liar. And Job only affirmed what God already knew about Satan. Job's perspective is that God has done this to him, and that he has no idea why. He thought and he thinks God runs the world on a strict code of justice at this point. Yet now he has no idea what is happening, and he longs to know why. He knows that he is innocent. He doesn't understand. So he pleads his case before God. He puts his case out there, and he seeks for a response. It is important to note that Job never curses or talks against God. He remains firm, and he knows his God. And he knows that God alone can vindicate Job in this instance. Some have asked the question if Job goes too far in his comments throughout this. To that, did Job cross a line, in essence? To that, I would say no. Job would make some blunt comments that I will admit, However, Job never lost his desire to appeal before God as he craved an answer. And if we just were to fast forward to chapter 42, we see that the Lord would rebuke the friends with these words in verse 7. My anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. God does not rebuke Job for his words. He does not count them as sinful, while the friend's words spoke wrongly against God. Job was counted as righteous, and he held his integrity. Consequences sometimes do result from sinful actions. They do. But wrong times do not always result from sinful actions, as we see from Job. The third and final lesson is tonight that I wanted to look at is the unanswered question. And the question is this: how does God run the world? Is it by strict code of justice, or is it by some other means, and why? At the end of the day, that is an overarching question that is asked throughout the entire book, to which, as I already said earlier, it is never answered in this book. Job never learns why he is suffering in the first place. Instead, he learns, and what we need to learn is patience and trust. The Lord would come to reply to Job, which is on a note. God never had to come down and talk to Job. He did that of his own accord. Job never had to have an answer. God came down and talked to Job because he did that because he wanted to, not because Job demanded an answer. You've got to learn that as well. But God never answers Job's question. Instead, what God puts before Job, all these marvelous things that he does. Instead, he does something quite differently. In fact, God does what Christ will often do in the Gospels. Christ sometimes doesn't answer direct questions verbatim. Instead, he chooses to teach back at people instead of just answering a direct question. That way they can see it and learn the lesson for themselves as well, which is what we see in Job. We'll turn to chapter 38. Chapter 38, verses 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkness counsels by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have the understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the seas with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garments and thick darkness its swaddling band. And we can keep going on and on and on if we wanted to. Now, I have no idea how to measure the foundations of the world. I can't even draw a picture in my mind of what that even means. But let me suggest that is the entire point that is trying to be made. All of this and much more that would be, there's another chapter and a half of that, at least, is both listed and even some that are not listed. Because God laid the foundations of the earth. God determined light and sun. God laid the stones. God made the expanses of the earth. Again, we can just keep on going down the list. We would never finish that list. God does and continues to do all of these things. Essentially, after all that God says that is put before Job is, well, this: can you do this? Surely you know how these things work. Why is it that that happens that way? Surely you can tell me why the wild donkeys go free, why they drink from that water, why does the creek happen flow in that way, and so on and so forth. God demonstrates to Job and to us to the array that he commands, the authority and the power that he holds. Therefore, who are we to question why God runs the world in such and such way? If one can do all of the things that he listed there, then hey, by all means, ask that question. But I don't know about you, but I can't even comprehend the first 5 verses of that. Not in a correct, proper manner. But considering that this is impossible for us to learn, then we need to learn where we are in relation to God. We are not God. We do not get to ask why he does things this way, because, well, I wouldn't even understand the answer or even understand the question in the first place. We do not get to ask why this happens, because we can't even fathom how or anything, because he made all and he organizes all. The Lord tells to Job and to us, but for us to learn our place and to have a little bit more trust and patience in the Lord. That's what Job learns at the very end. We do not get to question God. That's not how this works. But what we do is learn to trust and to know that he is watching overall, that God is working each and every day. And he is still watching overall, still working each and every day. I don't know about you, but I don't remember there being a verse in the Bible that says God is no longer working, that he's going to sit on the couch for a while. It's because it doesn't exist. Bible verse does not exist. Even out of context, you can't find that verse. That is because God is working each and every day. We may not understand how or why, and we do not understand how or why. But that needs to be okay. Because he is there, he's working, and that is what matters. That is what matters. Job never learns why everything has been lost. And then he gains everything, and then he gains twofold back at the very end, which also makes no sense, just if we were just to ask that question in our heads. But God runs the world. You don't run the world. We may have our perceptions, and we may have our ideas on how these things need to work, as the friends did, and even as Job thought he had an idea of how. That's not our place. Our place is to follow, to trust him, because he is working every day. And that needs to be enough for me and you. Our place is to see and to follow. In Exodus 14, before the Red Sea happened, what Moses tells the children is to stand still and to see the salvation of the Lord. That means to stand still and to see the salvation of the Lord. That does not mean to ask, why are you doing this that way? I have a better idea. It means stand still and watch the salvation of the Lord. And that's what we need to do today. Because God loves and he watches overall. Job learns where his trust and his focus needs to be set. And that focus is set on God to follow his way, to follow what his word says. God does not run the world on a strict code of justice. We can see that. Sin is not always directly related to suffering. Sometimes it directly is, but not always. Job suffered, and he never knew why, and he never would know why. And he died a man of many years. He would never know why. But he trusted in God, and that was more than enough for him. It should be enough. It should be more than enough for us. As James would say, oh, to have the steadfastness of Job. He didn't say that on accident. To be patient and to be trusting. I once saw something when I just was scrolling online one day, and this was a couple years ago, but it has just stuck out to me. Life is not fair. God is fair. Do not get the two mixed up, because they are not mixed up. Not to bend. In Job, we learn patience and endurance throughout the unknown. Job had no idea what was going to happen tomorrow, but he learned trust and patience. Not to bend to other people's needs or opinions. Job did not bend a muscle to his friends, or so-called friends, if you will. But to always remember our God and to keep our integrity is where it needs to be. The steadfastness of Job. So do we remember to trust our God? Or do we find ourselves questioning everything that we've ever read, which questions are not bad in themselves. They lead us to more knowledge and they lead us to more answers. And they are a good thing. But our questions should always lead us back to trusting in God. Everything we ever need to know is written in this book, as we talked about this morning. All other outside information, while it'll be nice to know, and it is nice to know sometimes, it's nothing more than a burden. And it is not important to what we do or how we act today and tomorrow. So as we close, will you come and trust God? He is there for us each and every day. So think on these things as we stand and as we sing.